Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Scramble. I'm your host, Luis Rodriguez. Thank you for being with us. On today's show, we'll be discussing a variety of issues. First, we'll be talking about Pope Francis's recent visit to Mexico. Next, we'll talk about President Obama's recent announcement on his planned trip to Cuba and what we think might happen in this historic trip. And finally, we'll be discussing about the recent arrest of Cliven Bundy and whether or not the FBI had the right to arrest him. Before we begin, let me introduce our panel. First, we have Matt Kimball, a UNLV graduate with a degree in political science. Next, we have Hunter Terry, a writer for the blog Live News Words. Next, we have Valarie Peritz, a junior majoring in journalism and media studies. And finally, we have James Schaeffer, a junior majoring in journalism and media studies. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
All right, let's begin with our first topic. The Pope had a tour of Mexico this month with special trips to the Church of the Virgin of Guadalupe and a trip to the U.S. and Mexico border. During his trip back to Rome, he was asked about his opinions on the presidential candidate Donald Trump. He stated that a person who thinks only about building walls and not building bridges is not a Christian. Was this right for the Pope to say that, or was he out of line? So James, let's start with you.
Well, first off, the trip altogether was an amazing trip alone for someone who represents the Catholic Church in Mexico. He apologized to the indigenous people of Mexico for atrocities committed by the Church on the indigenous people of Mexico. He made great friends and was able to repair a relationship between Mexico and the Vatican with President Nieto. And last but not least, he scolded the clergymen about their methodology with helping the poor. And he topped it all off, just like you said, with scolding Donald Trump on building walls and not bridges. And I think that could not have been a better showstopper. The Pope is a public figure and has a right to talk about these issues. Everything he said, everything he meant to say, not according to Donald Trump for whatever he wants to say that the Pope was informed or whatever else you mean. The Pope was completely in the right to talk about it. It's a happening issue. And he has a certain background on it that carries weight. If the Pope tells you that you're not a Christian, then that carries more weight than, I don't know, whatever pastor that Donald Trump goes to. But I imagine he's busy being non-existent.
The pastor? Okay.
Yes.
Well, what about you, Matt? What do you think?
I agree with the Pope's statement that, it's not very Christian to build walls instead of bridges. It's also not in the interest of diplomacy. In diplomacy, you don't argue for the ideal, you argue for what you can get. And it's the art of compromise. Is a giant wall bordering our country in the art of compromise? No, it is not. Is making overtures to Mexico to repair some of the damage done in the art of compromise? Yes, it is.
Okay.
I think it's really interesting that someone who he's leading right now in the Republican primaries, he has the most delegates, he's so radical that even the Vatican has an opinion on him. I think that he was right to say that Donald Trump, isn't very Christian-like in his acting right now. But I think it's interesting, the Pope going onto it is just, again, adding to Donald Trump's media attention, which is all he wants.
Now, my question to you, Hunter. Obviously the presidential election is happening here in the United States and the Pope lives in Rome. Is this something that the Pope should even care about that happens, outside of Rome?
I think it certainly is. The Pope is the representative for all Catholics, not necessarily all Christians, but all Catholics. And Mexico is a heavily Catholic nation. I think it's perfectly within his purview to speak to South American problems, and Mexico being so close, I think that fits the Latin America issue. He's from Venezuela, the first pope from this part of the world. He has a wide breadth of knowledge of what's going on in that continent, as well as with Catholics. And I think that when someone is hate-mongering and fear-mongering an entire country, entire races, I think that possibly more than anyone, the Pope is someone who should be speaking out because he is an official leader of one of the largest religions in the world.
Speaking about that, so, this Pope has been very politically active in what he says and what he does. After John Paul II, he's been the most active, I believe. Should this be the role of the Catholic leader, or should they just stay out of politics in general?
I think that the Pope for his own benefit of the Catholic Church, has to be involved in society and in the way that politics are moving. I mean, especially considering the child abuse scandal of the 90s and early thousands, the Catholic Church had a lot of ground to make up in getting back into the right side of public mind and pulling young people back into their portion of the faith. And to not stand up for entire Catholic nations who are being disparaged in the most, loud and media-savvy country in the world, with this kind of disparagement and slander being broadcast across the world, I think he'd be irresponsible if he didn't.
What about you, James? I saw you with your expressions.
The Pope Francis, and as progressive as the church is getting, provides a more than perfect foil for Donald Trump. On one side of the argument, we have Donald Trump, who says that the Mexicans and these immigrants are rapists, they're coming for our jobs, and he presumes some are okay people. While the Pope, on the other hand, while in Mexico, said to the people of Mexico, and to any official on that matter that would oversee any sort of immigration issue, that these people, no matter the place, the country, wherever on earth, these people are not, quote-unquote, cannon fodder. And that perfectly sums it up to the absolute foil that the Pope plays to Donald Trump. Donald Trump, who comes out as a stark conservative and saying that we need to protect jobs and the only way that an economy or people can win is by someone else losing, and the Pope on the other side saying we shouldn't fight against one another, we need to bring each other all up together as one, unlike Trump.
And to go off of that, the Pope is one person, or this Pope in particular, has gone across religious barriers. People across the United States and across the world love the Pope. He's really gotten into families and other religions. I'm not even Catholic, and I love the Pope because the message that he's spreading. So hopefully the words that he's saying can help America realize the direction that we actually want to go.
All right. Well, you want to say something?
I was just saying, I think it's ironic that after so many years of the Republican establishment tying themselves to religious movements, all of a sudden the most powerful religious leader in the world speaks out in a way that they don't particularly like, and now they all bash him and they're cutting ties, and he's not as religious as Donald Trump. It shows the duplicity and the hypocritical nature of what's going on there.
You want to say something?
Pope Francis has gone above and beyond in terms of reaching out to minority groups. He's spoken about homosexuality, LGBT rights, he's spoken about abortion, he's spoken about topics that the church has normally shied away from. And it's been very fascinating to watch how he's spoken on these issues in such eloquent words and how the world has responded to him.
Okay. Well, all right, with that, it's now time to hop from one Latin American country to another. So, after the announcement of the opening of relations with Cuba, President Obama has said his plans to travel to Cuba in March. He will be the first president to visit Cuba in 80 years. What are your opinions on this historic trip? So, Valerie, let's start with you.
I think that Obama going to Cuba, or let's go back. Obama opening the borders with Cuba, right? Having the diplomacy again, I think that's a great thing. We've been cut off for so long, and we don't need that anymore. And I think that Obama going there is a good first step to allowing all Americans to be able to go there.
Matt?
Totally agree. I mean, recently there have been changes in the policy for commercial air carriers traveling to Cuba. Obama has renewed certain ties with Vietnam, another country we weren't so popular with for a while. It's again, a testament to the foreign policy objectives of his administration to see how we can renew ties to countries we've alienated.
So with those flights, I've read reports on it, and if you look at the information, it's pretty much a sucky situation for the Cuban government because for the airlines to go in because of the embargo, they have to pay for the flight attendants, the pilots, every little detail. So obviously for us, that's nothing, but for the lovely communist country, that's a big expense. So do you think that's a fair situation for them or no?
I think it'll change, and I hope it'll change in the near future. I think, unfortunately, we're in a situation right now that is still being worked out legally, and we just have to bear with the legal system, as unfortunate as that may be.
What about you, James?
When it comes to Obama and Cuba, I have Havana about enough of it, okay? Looking at Obama's situation for how he's leading with foreign policy in Cuba, it's atrocious. Look first at the American capitulation that has just been so fondly, boldly renewed by the Castros. They see the United States supporting their programs, supporting their policies by opening these borders, by allowing free trade, by allowing tourism. We consider this a win on both ends, but from the Castros, they see this as the U.S. finally saying that they were wrong and we were right from the Cuban perspective. And second, it is a total misconception to think that tourism or free trade can in any way solve any sort of human rights atrocities or violations. If we think opening up a border to Cuba will fix anything in that nation, we are completely wrong. Look at Saudi Arabia. Look at Myanmar. Look at Egypt. All places where we've opened up with free trade, foreign aid, and tourism, but yet those governments that we consider at some point an autocracy that have tremendous human rights violations, and saying that we think that tourism is somehow going to be a different factor when it comes to Cuba is completely off message. And lastly, we see the tourism from a very pinpoint aspect in Cuba as kind of a beachside resort. The 1950s American cars, the gambling,
well, there's no gambling.
Well, there's no gambling, but that sense of Cuban 1950s noir lost. But when it comes to what actual entertainment is available in Cuba, what you will often find more than not is underage prostitution. Underage prostitution is rampant in Cuba, and to think that having tourists down there supporting any of the programs that have been upheld by the Cuban government is, again, completely and overly off message.
I couldn't disagree more. When it comes to Saudi Arabia and countries in the Middle East, I think we have a far different standard for why we would have peace with them than for accepting or than for looking for human rights changes, because that area is so tumultuous that we need allies, even if they're expensive allies that cost us some moral bargaining there. As far as the underage prostitution, I believe we still have tourism that's able to go to Thailand and Bangkok. So again, it seems like looking for reasons to single this nation out, that we've had this this embargo on and this haltage of trade and these blocked borders for 60 years, 70 years. If we're using those excuses, then we'd have to not open up trade there. Then we should use the same excuses to block China and Saudi Arabia and Thailand and tons of other countries. We don't, because that's not how we deal with countries anymore. And Cuba seems to be extremely anomalous, and because there's nothing else that we're looking for besides trying to have some tourism export, maybe open up some new sales market, and to help their people. I think that's what we're looking to do, not just to help their people with human rights, but with sales of products. The government, you're talking about having to pay for these airlines, or at least for the stewardesses and gas, whatever. The customers that go there will be spending money and buying products from Cuban merchants, putting money into their economy. So while the government may have to pay a price to bring those tourists there, the idea is they'll see economic ramifications that help their entire nation.
Well, first, you have to remember that these merchants aren't going to get any dollar for dollar that they're going to sell to these tourists. You have to remember that the merchant is a government. So the government is going to be collecting all this money. And it doesn't matter, obviously, yes, the government's going to have to be paying for these airlines, but they're going to be collecting all the money that the American tourists are going to come in. And the Cuban citizen will not see a dollar on what they're buying.
That's in theory.
That's not in theory.
It is in theory.
That's what happens. That is
opened up capitalism into communist countries. That's how we helped break down the walls in Russia. Was by as capitalism, as American pop culture and like that slowly started to seep through. Communism works very well, not very well, but it seems to work in a vacuum. And we have done nothing but give them this vacuum for 60 years, and nothing's changed. If our interest is in trying to change things, you have to have some leverage in trying to make deals. And obviously, the leverage of just giving them the finger hasn't been enough to do it.
Hold on. Let me get to my next question, because we're short on time. So today, President Obama just announced that he was going to make his final decisions on closing Guantanamo Bay. Do you guys believe that that's a good decision on his part? Matt, let's start with you.
First, I think it's a very interesting decision to come out with. He's said he wants to reduce the numbers of prisoners there, but thus far Congress has refused to let him. I don't think Congress is going to move forward and allow him to close the base itself. I think that's been a huge issue since he was running for election, was he wanted to close Guantanamo Bay, but unfortunately Congress still won't let him. Do I think it's a good policy move? I haven't researched it enough, honestly. Gut reaction would be that it would be in the best interest to do something moving forward.
What about you, Hunter?
I think it's a great idea. I don't believe in ignoring habeas corpus rights. I believe in this criminal justice system, and these people, if we're going to keep them as prisoners, should be on American soil with the rights of American prisoners. We house mass murderers. We house Timothy McVeigh in these prisons. We've dealt with plenty of people who are terrible people. I think that if you look at many maximum security prisons, one of the biggest risks is for, say, child rapists or any rapist can be often murdered in prison. Same with mass murderers who are seen as psychos, like the guy that ate people. What was his name?
Jeffrey Dahmer.
Jeffrey Dahmer. Thank you.
He died in prison because he was killed by a schizophrenic there.
Yeah. A lot of the people in prison are killed by other people. I think that the bigger danger is of people who are maybe murderers but still Americans killing these people in prison but not get the trial.
Well, what is it? So what is it that, okay, we bring these, prisoners from Guantanamo to the maximum prisons. What is it that it doesn't hold them for saying, when they're talking to the other prisoners, hey, you've been in jail for X amount of years, that's because of the government. You should, rally with us and join our cause and attack the American government.
Those prisoners, I'm sure, are already very angry at their situation. And we have solitary confinement if we're that worried about it. I'm not a big fan of solitary confinement either. I think that studies have shown that's almost a form of torture.
When you're locked in a box for 22 hours out of 24 for your day, you're going to have psychological issues crop up.
I agree. That's why I'm not a fan of solitary confinement. But I'm a bigger fan of solitary confinement than I am of extraordinary rendition, where people can be tortured or kept for years and years without ever seeing a judge or having a chance to have their day in court.
All right, before we take a break, Valarie, you have the last word.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think that there couldn't be better timing with Obama now announcing his trip to Cuba. I think that him taking the time to craft up this and want to take it to Congress. Everyone complains about his executive actions. He's not taking that this time. He's taking the time to go to Congress, try to get the bipartisan relationship, which this once was a bipartisan relationship. Now it's gone a little bit more partisan. But there's only, 90 people left in Guantanamo Bay. I think we released 10 prisoners last year. There's not that many left. And I think that there are people in there who have been in there for 10 years plus who have never gotten to see the courtroom. So I think it's time that we bring people to the U.S. and send the people who deserve to be back in their countries back in their countries.
All right. Now with that, we have to take a break. Don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere. We'll be scrambling right back.
The United States Air Force has a proud history of leading our nation in embracing diversity. We've been reaching new heights for years by understanding it's our individual experiences which make us strong. You can share in this success by seeking opportunities to learn and grow as a member of a diverse team. We are the world's greatest Air Force, not because of what we do, but who we are. This message is brought to you by the U.S. Air Force.
You'd do anything to take care of that spot on your lawn. So why not take care of that spot on your skin? If you're a man over 50, you're in the group most likely to develop skin cancer, including melanoma, the cancer that kills one person every hour. Check your skin for suspicious or changing spots, and ask someone you trust to check areas you can't see. Early detection can put you in a better spot. Go to spotskincancer.org to find out what to look for. A message from the American Academy of Dermatology.
Trisha's having a sleepover tonight. Can I go?
I wonder about Lucy's friends. What should I say? I know you're only 10, but one of these days a friend will offer you a drink. And alcohol at your age can lead to so many things. None of them good.
So can I go to the sleepover?
Lucy, I want you to promise me something.
I finished my homework.
Bigger promise. If there's any drinking, I want you to say, "No thanks, not my thing."
Mom.
I promise you, your real friends won't care. Deal?
Sure.
Really?
I promise, Mom.
They really do hear you.
Did you pack your toothbrush?
For tips on how to start the talk, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov, a public service message from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration.
DAV stands behind America's veterans to make their transition back home easier with free services and help getting the benefits they've earned. Help us fulfill the promise to our men and women who served. Go to DAV.org to learn more.
Welcome back. Now let's talk about an issue that has been in our backyards and now a national issue, the Bundys. Last year, the Bundys had a standoff with BLM officials on their ranch over issues of grazing over the lands and not paying for fees for the past 20 years. He was arrested this month when he flew to Oregon to stop the protests that his children were involved in Oregon. Do you guys think that that was right for the FBI to arrest him? We'll start with you, James.
Well, I think it was. You know, Cliven Bundy is there being arrested on felony charges of conspiracy to impede a federal officer. Those are all the charges. But we all know in a certain sense that this is going all the way back to like, what was it, 2012, 2013? When Cliven Bundy had the issue out in central Nevada and we had the whole issue of federal land versus state land. And, you know, cow grazing rights. So we all know that although he's been arrested on the issues of impeding a federal officer, that this goes much grander than that. And with the issue of the actual said incident in Oregon, I mean, they've already made a goddamn documentary on it. It's already called 41 Days and out there on the internet. So if you want to go out there with the bleeding hearts of those Oregon militiamen, here's a free video for you to watch. And I'll tell you, it doesn't get any better than the actual hostage crisis.
Well, I just have to say, I believe that he actually was arrested on the 2014 charge. That's what they arrested him for when he came off of the airplane.
I'm not sure he was arrested for just that, but he has since seen a number of indictments added to it.
There you go.
So the arrest may have been just for the Oregon
At
thing,
the airport.
but they've added a lot of the 2014 charges to that list.
My question is, why didn't they arrest him back in Nevada? I mean, he's been on federal lands for, what, 10 years now? Something like that. And I think that his whole family just needs to take a break, get out of the media. They've done their job. What they want to do, they wanted to let people know about cow grazing and how the federal government wasn't letting us have what we wanted. So they've done that. The 41-day standoff was way more than what was needed in Oregon. And I think it's right that we get them out of there and we get them out of our country's free area.
The FBI performed amazingly. I mean, they walked a thin line between this crisis and Waco. I mean, we had what? We have two people that were deceased from federal officers. Oh, one deceased from a federal officer, and I think another was deceased by an Oregon patrolman.
I'm not sure that one died, maybe.
Well, either way, this is a much better, from a PR perspective, for the FBI and for the ATF wasn't involved, but thinking back
for the federal agencies involved.
Yes.
Involved as compared to Waco. So it couldn't have been a bigger success. Cliven Bundy has been arrested on charges that date back to when he should have been arrested, and those involved have been arrested or scattered.
So Hunter, I'm going to ask you this question. Does Bundy have a point when he says that the bureaucrats in D.C. do not understand the issues associated with the lands compared to the ranchers?
Oh, I'm sure if that point was simply a black and white point, then yes, he would. I'm sure there's at least an element of that he does have. But the fact remains that's public land. That's our land. He owes us money. He owes the taxpayers money for using our land. It's if I was to go squat in someone's house, I should owe them rent. I have no problem with him being arrested, mostly because he then called, which he's been charged with, one of his charges is conspiracy to do what happened in 2014, which is to call basically a miniature army to point guns at federal officers and make them fear for their lives. He had people set up in sniper positions, and they ran a military-style assault to steal these horses or cows back, whatever it was, cows, by marching towards the front gate and drawing the attention of federal officers, and then having the rest of their group break in the back door and sneaking the cows out. The officers who came to the front were then under sniper rifles and fearing for their lives. I don't see how this guy wasn't arrested sooner, as you mentioned earlier. The only thing I can say, I believe I read somewhere that some of the people who originally joined his group stayed on as security and were like mounting turrets, basically watching out for government officials. So the FBI knew whenever they went to get him, there was going to be there could have been casualties, and they lucked into the fact that he went to Oregon without his bodyguards.
What about you, Matt? What do you think? Do you think Bundy has a point?
No, I don't. I think that, it is federal land. Who owns the federal government? The people of the United States. What are the first words in the Constitution of the United States? We the people.
But isn't Bundy considered a citizen of the United States? So isn't that then his land?
It's all of our land.
Well,
so
isn't he
it's
a
your
sovereign
land,
citizen?
it's my land, it's her land, it's your land, and it's your land.
I know
So
the song.
what right does that one person have to deny all of our claims to that property?
Okay, what were you gonna?
And isn't he a sovereign citizen? I mean, he doesn't even
gosh.
believe in the federal government and our, government systems and the police. He doesn't believe in all that. So if he wants to say, oh, these are my lands, I'm not a part of the federal government, he deserves to be taken off the lands and he deserves to be arrested.
And not only arrested, he's also being denied bail because the federal government rightfully doesn't believe that he'll show up for trial.
They think he's a flight risk, and he
Of
is.
course he is
has
a
so
flight
many.
risk.
He has his own militia.
Yep.
All right. What do you think, James? Do you think the BLM has gone too far with their land controlling?
I really don't have enough information to speak on that matter, but I will tell you, whatever comes out of Cliven Bundy's mouth on the issue between federal and state land and his cows, I pun intended, wouldn't want to utter anything about it.
I would say, as someone who grew up a lot of my young life on a farm where my dad had horses and some cattle, if he's using this extra land, it must be because he does not have enough to feed his animals well on his own land. So I would think he probably would want to buy some more land.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Hunter. With that, that's all the time that we have. I just want to thank the panelists for coming in. Follow us on Facebook at UNLV Scramble and Twitter at UNLV The Scramble. Also, email us your opinions at unlvscramble@gmail.com. For further discussion, we want to hear from you, the audience, answer our weekly question. Should Mark Zuckerberg pay for Kanye's ideas and help him get him out of his debt? Let us know. Thank you for being with us. See you next time.